Morning, everybody. So it's funny, really. We're talking about cognitive bias on a morning after drinking beer when most of your cognitive functions aren't even working. So that's a bit of a challenge. But yesterday, at the end of the day, we had... Thank you. Hello. The end of the day, Sean, in his talk from South Africa, mentioned, or he talked about leave your biases at the door, or leave your biases at home, which is kind of an interesting kind of link to this. So, as Mark says, I've been interested in this for a few years, and I'll talk a little bit about it and why it's important to us. So, I like this picture, but have you ever had a situation at work, or even personally, where you've got a plan to do something, and you're going in this direction, and then you suddenly realize there's a load of unintended consequences, and you're going the wrong way? And in fact, I used to always call it unintended consequences, particularly on working in kind of programs or projects, you're doing, or even changing a process, you're trying to do something, and then it goes slightly off. And I just say, oh, that's an unintended consequence, which is kind of not particularly helpful. So anyway, I like that picture. Does anybody, have you had that experience where you're trying to do stuff and you don't quite get the results you expect? Good. It's not just me. Because this could just be a kind of an autobiography of all my mistakes otherwise, which wouldn't be very good. So, so that's kind of the basis of this. So it's a bit like, why do things go wrong that perhaps you would not expect them to go wrong? So one of the cognitive biases, or the single cognitive bias I'm most interested in, is this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And it's about 20 years old. And what's amazing about this is when I first saw it, I thought it was a joke, because it's actually quite funny. In fact, I think I first saw it at the beginning of the Trump presidency, and that's why I thought it was a joke. Because the idea of this is that even intelligent people, when they have little knowledge of the subject matter, they are very confident in their decisions and their opinions, extremely confident, because they're bright, right? And we all suffer from this. We're bright, yeah, that should be straightforward. And then as you get into doing the thing, whatever it is, and you really develop experience in driving the process, driving the project, applying a technology, whatever it is, learning to play the guitar, you suddenly realize, actually, this is a lot harder than I thought. It's quite nuanced, and there's a lot of stuff here which is really sort of unpleasant. And when you're in the middle of that pit, it's quite depressing. And ironically, that reminded me of the talk yesterday about the rugby spirit in business. Because I was talking to the guys afterwards, and one of the interesting things about that rugby talk is that the fact is that pain and struggle is an important part of building a team and building for success, right? And that's what the rugby talk was about. And that pain and struggle is what goes on in the middle with all the stuff we do. And then if you're lucky enough to get through all that to the other end and you end up as a real expert, you're never as confident as you were when you were naive and a little bit ignorant of the topic. Now that's kind of really interesting, which is why when you meet a real expert in any topic, they will never give you an answer to everything. Quite often they'll say, kind of depends, yeah, some people say this, some people say that, I've had these experiences. They will very rarely tell you, yeah, definitely this, right? So my first sort of observation is, anybody who tells you categorically, this is absolutely right, they haven't thought about it very hard, if it's anything significant. So, does that all make sense, right? And when you can see why I thought it was funny, because I thought that was like a joke about Donald Trump, you see, like he was confident about everything, but knew very little about much of it. But also, in my experience in big global companies, working for some American multinationals, the number of times where we had big initiatives coming out of headquarters, and you just put your head in your hands and go, oh no, that is never going to work. They haven't thought this through at all. And I'm sure you've all had those. And that was an example of this as well. And that watermelon on the right, does anybody know why that's there? Bit of fruit, healthy. Anyway, the reason that's there is one of the impacts of Dunning-Kruger that we all suffer from, or we all experience, is KPIs, key performance indicators. So management say, I want you to hit these things, whatever it is, VSO, attrition, all the rest of it. And everybody I speak to who's really delved into it say, the problem we've got is everyone's managing the KPIs to make them green, but when you cut into them, they're not green at all. When you dig into the detail, they're red in the middle. So that's the watermelon effect for KPIs. So next time you have a meeting with management, say, I think we got a watermelon. And that kind of interests me, and it touches every part of business. That's kind of what amazes me, and it actually touches a lot of your personal life as well. So there's about 112 identified cognitive biases, and you'll be very pleased to know I'm not going to go through them, because I don't know them either. And that's a little picture on the right about how they frame out. But cognitive biases are just mental shortcuts. They're things that we've developed through evolution as a species to help avoid getting eaten by tigers or mauled by bears or falling off a cliff, right? So that it worked quite well for us. These are very quick shortcuts to avoid us overthinking at moments of crisis. The trouble is, in modern life, we use this for stuff that isn't a crisis, which is kind of a challenge. So, little test for you, and I appreciate we had a night on the beer last night. So I just want you to think about this. If you have a piece of paper, write down these numbers, or if you use your phone, just write them down. So, this is just called cognitive reflection. So a bat and a ball costs $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Just work that out. Next one, if it takes 5 machines, 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets in minutes? 3, lake, there's a patch of lily pads. Every day, the patch doubles in size. If it takes 48 days for the patch to cover the entire lake, how long would it take for the patch to cover half the lake? Right? So you've got 3 numbers in your head. And the first one is 5 cents. And I always say 10. All the time, I say 10. But it's 5. If you actually work it out, it is 5. But your little shortcut goes, oh, it's obvious. Anybody get that 5? You're a genius. God, dear. You should be running the country. Second one, 5 minutes, not 100. Anybody? I always get that one wrong as well. Anybody get that right? Ah, this is amazing. This is like, I think we should call a university. And then the third one, I do tend to get this one right, because I think this one's a bit more obvious. 47 days, but it's not. But you can work out why it is we jump to those conclusions, right? And it's quite interesting to, as intelligent people, to look at that and go, that's a bit weird, isn't it, that I get it completely wrong. Now, if anybody got all 3, you're either very good at thinking slowly, or you've seen this before. But either way, that's all good news. But this is kind of important to think about. And sometimes I go through these and go, hang on, that's not right, that's not right. But if you work it out, it is. Because if it was $1, and so if the ball cost 10 cents, and the bat costs $1 more, then the bat costs $1.10, so the total will be $1.20, so that ain't right. That's the point. So this is kind of interesting. I'm fascinated by this idea we don't always see what we ought to see. So this is either a duck or a rabbit, or both, depending how you look at it. And I think this is just kind of interesting, but it's really, really important in business, and particularly it's important in these times where we're trying to do transformation. Because we make massive assumptions about how things are going to work, processes, technology, people, data, and we're wrong a lot of the time. And, I spend a lot of my time talking to big corporations around the world where they're going, we just spent $25 million on this, and we thought we were going to be flying in, 12 months, and we're nowhere. What's wrong? Listen, nothing's wrong. It was never going to take you 12 months. And they go, oh, well, that's what we thought. Exactly, but nobody thought it through. So I'm not going to go through these, you'll be pleased to know. But you know about all these, but these are, I still think Dunning-Kruger is the most important business-wise, but these are kind of important for us to remember, because the confirmation bias, we all know the things that you tend to, when things go well, you tend to assume it's all, it's all down to you, and that's also that if you've already got a frame of reference that you believe in, you'll support that information. And that kind of is one of the reasons why conspiracy theories work so well. Because if you already believe something is odd, you're going to believe anything that goes with it. Groups, so if you've got people in your group who you believe think like you tend to agree with them. I like the third one. is when good things happen to us, it's because we've done a really good job. There's no luck involved, right? When good things happen to other people, it's probably a bit of luck. And when bad things happen to us, it was completely, I didn't see that coming at all. And with other people, they're just stupid. Right? It's interesting. Availability of information. So only, whatever information you have to mind, you use that to confirm things. This attribution, hindsight. Yes, I knew it all along. Well, you only knew it all along for the things that actually happen. For the ones that don't, you'd never have that discussion. So, and then a few more. Anchoring bias is interesting. When you want to buy a car, and they say to you, this car is $30,000 or whatever it is, you go, what? And you're not going to pay whatever that number is, but it's anchored you then. So any number after that is based on that. So if you end up getting it for $27,000, you think you've got a great deal. And it's rubbish. It makes no sense. But it makes sense to us, right? Halo effect is, if you've got somebody who's particularly good, everything they think and do turns to gold, you think. So anyway, it's just, the last one is important in transformation and change, because we all prefer, in our native, basic, sort of Neanderthal state, prefer things to stay as they are. Because when things change, the tiger's probably going to come for you, or the bear's probably going to eat you, or claw you to death, or whatever. So this is this is kind of the fundamental reason why change is hard, and people find lots of excuses and reasons not to do it, because we're programmed as a species to try and keep things the same, right? So it all makes perfect sense. So, how does it apply to real life and business and change and processes? And one of the big ones is, whenever you're looking to improve a process or drive a transformation or deliver a complex program, or even drive some kind of end-to-end collaboration across the business, everyone always assumes that the outcome is obvious, the good outcome. And what does good look like in any context? So in the entire spectrum of acquiring customers through orders, credit, cash, and sustaining customers in the long term for your business, what does good look like for that isn't easy. It seems easy, but it isn't. And I'm sure you've all been through it. But of course, executives often, because they have little time to spend on each individual topic, they'll say, right, that's what we want, here's the measure. You go, really? You sure? You sure that's what good looks like? So my only observation to you is challenge. When you've got, particularly if you're going to be putting a lot of effort and money and people's hopes and fears onto it, make sure you work out what good looks like. And it takes time, and it's challenging, and you have to refine your thinking, you have to get stakeholders together. And that picture at the bottom, the two lighthouses, in every business, functional leaders, the VPs and the SVPs, in each functional area, organizational unit, they've got their own view of what good looks like related to what their performance measures and how they're paid. But quite often, the head of marketing, for example, almost certainly, the head of marketing doesn't have the same view of what good looks like as a head of business services, shared services, or the head of order to cash. So immediately you've got a conflict. Now, rather than just say, and I heard yesterday in one of the discussions, we didn't want to look at other performance measures because that's outside the scope of order to cash. You go, well, that's kind of interesting, because if you avoid looking at the things that are ahead and earlier of the bit of the process that you're responsible for, you run a big risk of actually only solving a small part of the problem and missing a big opportunity. So our job is to understand those different perspectives and try and bring them together and try and get some common ground, so you've got a picture of what good looks like, that all of the executives and the stakeholders and participants in those functional towers or organizational units say, yeah, that makes sense to me. Some are more important to me than others, but I agree with the picture. Does that make sense to everybody? So, but all I'm saying is it is really hard. And I even know it in my own business. People say, oh yeah, so what's our priorities for 2022? And I go, oh God, right, okay. Well, give me some time. I've got to think about that. Because there's a lot of slightly conflicting and competing things going on. Long-term, short-term goals, all that stuff. The other time we see this is in personal change. So every new year, everyone makes a resolution. In fact, I've given up making resolutions because I never keep them. But yeah, the classic one is, I'm going to get fit, right? And people go, yeah, so I'm going to get fit, there's a great new gym down the road, I'm going to get some new gear, I'm going to get a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, I'm going to get all the stuff, I'm going to get a haircut, for God's sake, I'm going to do all this stuff, and I'm going to get pay for a subscription to the gym. And people feel real good about that. But you haven't done anything yet. I mean, actually, nothing has happened to get you more fit at that point until you have spent a substantial amount of time consistently going through, you know, when you don't want to, when you do want to, going through that with perseverance. But we all suffer from I've kind of got ready for it. It's a bit like the big change programs. We've bought the software, we've hired the external consultants, everyone's aligned, we had the big presentation, there's the money, off you go. And the executives go, we're done. Well, we haven't actually started yet. And so kind of worth bearing in mind as well. So this kind of relates in terms of change programs to this point about Dunning-Kruger's particularly significant, I think, with big change programs, because people assume that when you take this large technology investment, there's a big investment in, you know, process change advisory and implementation consulting, we're going to do this stuff. And most of this red line indicates a strategic program of some sort. And you could say that might be, on the x-axis might be years, it can be whatever you want, but it's typically years. And for the first bit, you invest in all this stuff and you're underwater because you're spending money and you haven't really delivered any benefits yet. And at some point, the red line comes up over the x-axis and you're starting to deliver business value, which is great. The problem is, the executives normally expected to be into the positive territory after a year and a half. And when you get to the second year and they're still not in positive territory, they start getting disappointed. And quite often you see executives suddenly saying, I'm not going to be responsible for that anymore. I'm going to focus on this and we'll give that to Pete, who's just joined the company. And you go, why is that? Because he doesn't want to do it because he thinks it's going to fail. But it isn't necessarily going to fail. It's just not going as fast as he hoped. Which is all very good. So the problem with these big programs is it's so easy to believe this stuff. I mean, I don't want to get specific, but I have so many conversations with, I mean, this one about, it was on the source to pay side, a very big, well-known company had an executive global process owner who was on the executive committee, and they spent a fortune on a source to pay transformation program. And he thought after, you know, when we've implemented the software, job done, we're doing well. And when they realized it isn't like that at all, after about 2 years, he kind of reshaped, he agreed with the CEO to reshape his responsibilities, so he's no longer responsible for the end-to-end process, he just wanted to be responsible for the source to contract piece. So let's not worry about the rest of it. And so people actually, you know, it's frightening actually that you invest all this money, realize you got it wrong, and then back away from it and try and get around it. So it can be a bit worrying. So one of the answers is to stop trying to put these see everything in these big outcomes that take a long time, and to take this Pareto idea of trying to get 80% of the value for 20% or less of the effort, cost, and cycle time. Now we know Pareto principle works in normal life. There's a lot of examples of it. But it also works in business, and I think if we can use that, a lot of good things happen because we focus on much shorter business value. I'm not talking about implementations of systems or anything. It's the value accrued by the business happens quicker. You do these things in bite-sized chunks, and it can be hard to work them out, but it's definitely possible in most cases. But what happens is, not only do you get value fast, people get more confident, and the executives get more confident they made good decisions, and then that also informs the strategy you're going towards. And probably most important is all the business, all your kind of participants and stakeholders suddenly get used to the fact that change happens quite often. Little bits happening here, there, everywhere, and that's really good because you get change ready and everybody gets in a better frame of mind. So kind of that's slightly related to all of that. So I think that's a really important tactic for dealing with Dunning-Kruger. The other issue, which is another sort of Dunning-Kruger problem, is in anything you do, whatever you say the value of it is, you know, so you're implementing a process change and you're going to save X million in 3 years' time. Let's say we'll call it 10 million to save make it simple arithmetic. So 10 million in 3 years' time. The point about it isn't worth 10 million now. It might be worth 10 million in 3 years' time, but right now it's not. Now, in accounting, that's called net present value. But we don't seem to think about that when we're doing programs of change. So if someone said to you, next September, I'll give you $1,000. And you go, okay, that's interesting. And they said, what would you take now rather than wait? Will you take a lot less than $1,000? Because the person offering you might not have $1,000 next September. It might be you don't need it next September. It might be all the priorities have changed. I mean, just look at the last 2 years, right? Priorities change pretty quick, right? So the point about it is value you can deliver quickly is worth more than the same value you deliver slowly, which is kind of an important thing, and it doesn't really get well reflected in our thinking about process change. But it relates to that Pareto principle thinking. And I just, the quicker you can do stuff, the quicker you can realize and crystallize the value, and the quicker you can move on and do more good stuff. And also, the quicker you can realize if you've made a mistake, of course, which is also important. So, what do you do to limit cognitive bias? Well, there are things you can do. The biggest one, I think, is an important, on topics that are important and systemic in business and in life, slow down and just breathe and think it through, and don't force yourself to make a decision too quickly. Now, that's a bit counterintuitive because everyone wants this kind of speed and let's get it done. But, give yourself a couple of days to think about it and you'll end up with a better, quicker result than if you make a knee-jerk decision. So be very aware of what's going on, these things. Challenge your own beliefs. Be aware that there is this cognitive bias in your own head. So just say, is that actually true, or is that just the way I'm framing it in my head? And challenge receive wisdom as well. So people say, oh yes, this is, and particularly with technology, it's very popular with technology. Once everybody's doing a particular thing, everyone goes, oh yeah, well everyone's doing that, so it must be good. Well, maybe. And then the blind approach is interesting. It's like, don't overpopulate your head with too much information. I was talking to Tom Bangerman last night about when it was early. You hear Tom? He's recovering. I knew he had one too many. So he was saying when he started work for a Big Four auditor, he had to do some statistical modeling about the value of certain companies. And his boss said to him, so he told him what to do. Oh, great. And just before his boss said to him, and by the way, that one's worth 5 million, that's 30 million, and that's 50 million. And I go, oh, why did he tell me that? So just so you know. But you've asked me to build the statistical models to work out what the values are, and you've just told me what the values are. Well, you ought to know. And then, of course, you're confused then. You say, well, you've already told me the number, so what you're asking me for is a statistical model to prove that number, not to give you a factual answer. And we all get that as well. So that's about being a bit blind to all of the extras. So thinking too fast is part of this Dunning-Kruger problem, and it's a habit. We all have habits, and there's loads of ways you can develop new habits and break habits. And you probably all know about this, but there's a lot of debate about whether it takes 3 weeks or 3 months to create or break a habit. Doesn't really matter, it's somewhere in that zone. And what you need is, you've got to have a plan, you've got to work out what behavior you want to change, whether it's, I come to conclusions too quickly, I think too fast, whatever it is. Then what am I going to replace that with? How am I going to do it differently? Have some self-discipline, and then, if it's hard, sometimes it's quite good to get, to do it with a colleague and say, look, I'm trying to get through this, you've got your one, let's hold each other to account. Interestingly enough, the human body has a few tools to help us with that, which is a bit handy. So it's given us all this cognitive bias to screw us up. It's good, it's given us something to help. So you all know that once you get into doing something good that you're happy with, you start getting your happy hormones, right? It makes you feel good. And it's a bit like the Pavlov's dogs, because at some point you just have to think about going for a run and you feel good already. And you say, oh, I won't bother, I've already got the benefit. But it's kind of interesting, and that helps reinforce habits. So once you can get in the habit of doing something, which is why you need to do whatever habit you're doing, you need to have a daily reminder and daily action, because that's what causes this to happen. If you're doing stuff every 2 weeks, this will never happen. So you've got to build something into your mechanisms. So, and this is, again, the evidence, really, of Dunning-Kruger again, but this is Nobel Prize winner, this guy, this Atul Gawande surgeon. And this quote here, we always hope for the easy fix, but actually the reality in success in anything requires a lot of small steps with a lot of people doing the right thing all the time, which again comes back to that spirit of rugby discussion yesterday as well. But that, again, flies in the face of our quick thinking Dunning-Kruger problems. So I quite like this because it helps me realize if I'm ever thinking about, if we do this, we'll solve a big problem really easily. Generally speaking, it's unlikely to be the case. So just think about it, what's involved. If you're interested in these ideas of thinking fast, thinking slow, Dunning-Kruger, Daniel Kahneman's book, called of the same name, is well worth a read, or a listen, if you like audiobooks. And that is a little bit about cognitive biases. Thank you. Anyone got any questions? Are your cognitive faculties starting to wake up? It is a bit early in the morning for all that. We should have done this after lunch. Anyway, hopefully it's stimulated a few thoughts, because for me, this is probably one of the biggest realizations I've had in recent years. And the realization you can fix it. That's what I like about it. It's not just preordained. You can solve, if you want to, you can change how you think. And it's helpful, particularly in the complex world we live in business-wise. So, no questions, but thank you. You can all go back to your rooms now.